All right, so joined today with Eric Gales and Jai Aswani, and so glad that you guys could both be here. Now, Jay, you and I know each other. You're a racker, but Eric, you're new to the table. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. Yeah. So I run the AWS commercial business in Canada. I've been doing that for about 8 years now. Started in 2015, end of 2015, as employee number one. So I'm
Wow.
lucky enough to build the business out in Canada. So that's been fun. Prior to that, I had some great roles. I worked for VMware for about 2.5 years, running the Canadian business. Before that, I worked for Microsoft for 13
Mhm.
years. And before that, I worked for the best PC company of all time, Compaq Computer,
There you
for eight
go.
years.
I spent a little time in Houston, so I'm very familiar with the old
Yeah, I
Compaq
used to
world.
spend a lot of time in Houston. Yeah.
I bet you did, working for Compaq Computers. So you have a lot of heritage in how computing has absolutely evolved over the years.
Yeah, I mean, it's really been fascinating. I talk about that a lot um, because I really, when I started in the industry, I started at the end of the mid-range era. I worked on mid-range computers,
Yeah.
UX and Xenix computers, but really the dawn of the PC era.
Mhm.
And when the PC came along, the PC, it transformed things because it put productivity into the hands of individuals. And
Yeah.
so you didn't have to, everything wasn't going back and forwards to get
That's right.
off the mid-range or the mainframe.
Yeah.
And so that was transformative. But then since then, I've been lucky enough to sort of be through a few waves. And so local area networking, and then the PC server, and then the internet, and then cloud computing, and of course, now Gen AI. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's been an incredible journey. And I think the IT sector, if you want to learn about the importance of innovation,
Mhm.
work in IT for a while, and you learn quick.
You learn quick, and that pace is certainly going faster. I mean, Jay, you and I were talking about this earlier. When you
Absolutely.
look at, you think about what the pace of innovation was before. Think about going back to Compact for your
Mhm.
your heritage. I mean, if somebody worked in enterprise IT, well, every 3 years you would get budget to go upgrade the servers, and that was the big project, and that consumed a year, and then everybody went back to business, and then it was keep the lights on kind of stuff. There really wasn't a lot of innovation at that point. Maybe some more memory, a little faster CPU. At that point, we're starting to look at distributed storage a little bit in those early days, but it was pretty stoic was the word I put in my notes, to be honest. It was stoic, especially by comparison. We look what's happening today. I mean, the Gen AI stuff that's going on is incredible.
Absolutely. Nobody heard about ChatGPT before November 2022.
Yeah. I
And
mean, if we were recording this last year,
yeah,
we probably wouldn't know how to spell it.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, I think it's a function of the digitization of business,
Yeah.
and so the dependency on the use of digital technologies has evolved
Mhm.
rapidly, and so now it's critical to every company. And so I think we were talking before the interview there just about the sort of historical separation about
Mhm.
IT and business, and now it's critical that those two parts move together.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that's driving the rate of innovation. Is just this increased appetite to apply these digital technologies in every business, in every use case, and every aspect of a business's operation.
Yeah. I really like the phrase you use, the digitization of a business. And that leads us, I think, into a really interesting thing to discuss. Because we were talking even before that pace of change happens differently, and it looks a little bit different whether you're in a large enterprise,
Yeah.
a smaller company, public sector, not public sector. Jay, what are some of the differences you're seeing?
And the way I look at it, innovation is basically there is disruption, but it's happening at a fast pace,
Yeah.
like very fast pace. And if you look at large enterprises, the challenge that they have in terms of meeting innovation or beating it or creating your own pathways on disruption, sometimes it's decision making, sometimes it's a lot of the patterns that need to be put into place. uh, if you look at the other end of the spectrum, if it's a small business, what we find is sometimes it's the CTO is also the chief marketing officer, is also the head of sales, and they don't have any problem in in manifesting the use cases, getting onto the cloud. The problem that they run into is I want to be able to find and implement those use cases fast.
Yeah.
And you know, it applies to both the enterprise as well as the small and medium business. And that's where we've found a lot of success in Rackspace, that we can come in with those accelerators
Hmm.
to get the customers off the ground. The other thing that enterprises also have struggled in the past is one of the ways to meet and drive innovation is to transform your estate, transform your applications, whether they are on-prem, you want to take them to AWS, or whether they're already in the cloud, you've done a lift and shift. The challenge hitherto has been that you want to do transformation at scale, it requires a huge amount of business case, and thereby there's a little bit inertia. Now, the kind of tools that we bring to the market as Rackspace, really clears the air on a lot of that. How do you kind of get in there, do the reverse engineering, and leveraging our deep engineering talent, you get the implementations of the running start.
Right. Eric, how about you when you're looking after the
Yeah.
country of Canada, the transformation? Let's
Yeah.
talk large business, small business at
Yeah.
this point.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is it's interesting whether I'm speaking to an exec in a large company or a small company.
Mhm.
I have the same basic story, which basically says, we believe that the only sustainable competitive advantage for any business is innovation.
Mhm.
And that's been proven. I
Yeah.
say to to somebody, I bet you can think of a company that was top of its game, and then it wasn't. And if you're my age, it's always Blockbuster.
Exactly.
But there are countless examples, and if you sort of trace the rise and fall of companies, typically they rise on the back of some innovation.
Right.
But if they can't sustain that innovation, then they'll encounter
The
challenges.
innovator's dilemma, right?
And that innovation, I think sometimes again, people always think it has to be something big, but it could be something small. And so innovation to AWS and to Amazon is just doing something in a new way. Could be something as extreme as delivering packages with a drone, but it could be just moving a button on a website. And so this sort of maniacal focus on, am I innovating and where am I innovating? Because if you're not, then you're just leaving space for someone to come and out innovate you. And there's countless examples. So that's sort of the first sort of pillar. And then
Well, just before you get too far into that, I was listening to Liz Burton, an AWS who helps look after us. She was giving a talk yesterday, and she said something that's been nagging me since yesterday evening. And I woke up thinking about it, and that was, if you're not failing, you're not innovating.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the sort of AWS culture as well, which is, I think Jeff's on record of saying, if you're not swinging for the fences, you can never get a home run.
Yeah.
And so you have to try. Now, creating a culture where failure is okay is non-trivial. In fact, if you come back to sort of the challenges between small businesses and big businesses, in large businesses, one of the challenges they have with sort of driving innovation is they typically have a lot of legacy. There's a lot of inertia around the way you used to do things. So now the interesting thing with that is, if you were the company that had capital that could invest in this technology in the early years, you gave you an advantage. And now it's the opposite. It's something you're trying to jettison to get to a new way. If you're a small business, you typically don't have that same kind of legacy. You can move a bit more quickly. In large companies, failure is often frowned upon, and it's a dirty word. In smaller companies, it's a smaller group. We can just agree between, we're going to try, and if it doesn't work, we're just going to call it.
We won't talk about it.
And so, but it's definitely a sort of an aspect of driving innovation is sort of the willingness to try new things in new ways. And there's plenty of ways in this sort of digital fabric now to do that in a way that's much less risky than in the past. So in the past, an innovation might need, I've got to get a ton of capital and buy a bunch of equipment and deploy it and get a bunch of people, and then, oh, it's not working. And then people tend not want to admit that. Whereas if it's in the cloud and it costs you 10K to stand it up and it's not working, you can turn it off. If it works, you can scale it up. And so this cloud era has created a different set of dynamics around how you can think about trying things and innovating.
Yeah, you talk about the large companies and small companies, and I love the comparison that the big ones used to have the capital to move faster than the little ones, and really that's in a lot of cases it's opposite. You used your example before of Blockbuster. I mean, Blockbuster was doing great until this little upstart who could stream some things or send DVDs out instead of making you drive in.
Right.
Was able to do it a little
But
bit.
even that, in that story, that person, and there's a great story, he went to visit them to say, hey, why don't we team up?
Yeah.
And within that context, the big machine just wasn't able to, I guess, swallow their pride or think differently about how they might do something. And, the rest is history. But even with that Netflix story, what's interesting about that, again, which I think is a good sort of testimony to the need to continue to innovate, is that what they worked out was that actually streaming media was not going to be that difficult, and so other people could enter that, which is what's happened. And so what they decided to do was they would have to generate original content that would be the driver for you to come and have a subscription. And so within that model itself, for a period of time, obviously they were by far and away the leader, and then other streaming services have come in. But the reason you have a Netflix subscription is often because you like the shows that they produce.
Shows that, because I can watch The Crown over
there. There you go.
My wife watched The Crown. That's right. But it really is, innovation that's driving us faster and faster. You built this amazing company at Amazon that has a culture of innovation, of
Yeah.
moving fast and swinging for the fences. But it creates a problem for the rest of us, and that is, how do we keep up with the ones that are just fantastic? I mean,
Yeah.
Jay, maybe you got
I
some
think,
thoughts.
I've been with Rackspace for 8 months, and from a Canada standpoint, if you look at the hotspots, it's just amazing. The vibrant culture of startups, innovation, and the partnership between the enterprises, the private sector, the public. And it's been a privilege and fun working with AWS to drive user groups. So we've done it across all the key, hotspots like Kitchener-Waterloo, Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, and Montreal. And what we find in these user groups, we talk about the innovation that AWS is driving so fast,
Yeah.
how Rackspace is helping make it simple and actionable for our customers, and also for the audience that shows up. And I had the fortune of going to the Kitchener-Waterloo recently user group. I met students. I met people who are, 3-person startups doing some amazing work, and they're just grabbing a slice of pizza, talking, and immersive, right? They are able to talk to the practitioners from AWS, from Rackspace, and amongst each other. I think that's an amazing way to, champion the spirit of innovation as AWS has been supporting us to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I sort of always advocate for with, any exec that I meet is the need to be curious,
Right.
because this stuff is moving very quickly. And what's interesting is that it's largely moving quickly as a function of two things. One is the feedback that we get from customers about what they're looking for, what they want to do, what they need,
Right.
and then the rate at which AWS can produce those things. And so those two things mean you have this sort of cumulative effect of a lot of technology being delivered. But all of that stuff is really useless to you if you're not aware that it exists.
If you don't know the question
how,
to
you
ask in
don't
the first
know
place.
where you would apply it,
Yeah.
and you don't have the skills to deploy it, or you don't have partners that can help you with that. And so the need to be curious, and not just from a technology perspective, it's not just the technologist, it's the business. Increasingly, the business needs to sort of appreciate the art of the possible, because that's how you can build this sort of tight coupling between that aspiration and the actual execution of the IT.
Well, what I found in a lot of mature, larger organizations is IT likes to keep the business at a bit of an arm's length. They want to be the ones to deliver the solution, but more and more these days, it has to be co-developed, co-created.
Yeah, I mean, I think, my observation there would be those companies that continue to sort of silo these functional groups, they move much more slowly than those that really embrace the need for the business, the line of business, the key executives to really understand what's contemporary, how do you apply this technology, why is it important, where is it important, and then sort of binding with the technologists and the partners that
Yeah.
you need to sort of bring specialization to some of these things into your business. That's critical, and that's what's much more contemporary. And then innovation is about the whole. Again, so I see a difference between those organizations that have an innovation department
Yeah.
and those that are configured to say it's everybody's job to be thinking about how we innovate.
Right. And the door is always open to hear those ideas.
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's just, I think we've all heard technology is the business nowadays.
Mhm.
And, most places, I think Canada as a country, I'll again go back to my passion for Canadian innovation. It is just mind-boggling the amount of, advances we've done, whether it's global, on the global stage, like e-commerce. You got Canadian firms that are like leading it from the front. You've got banks that like to call themselves as technology shops with a bank store sign at the front. They've got data scientists that have PhDs. So I think it's just mind blowing the pace of innovation. As Eric, you said, that there's a good feedback loop coming from the business over to the leaders like Amazon, and within those businesses you have the tight knit relationship that we are seeing more and more on the enterprise side. And my hypothesis is that in the next 2 to 3 years, the traditional small and medium business is similarly going to have, because now the opportunity exists.
Yeah.
The generative AI is democratizing technology a lot more. You'll see a lot more uptake on innovation-led technology, use cases in the traditional sector as well on the small business side. And then last thing I'll say, as Rackspace, we've got a lot of customers that are born in cloud, digital native born customers. And for them as well, the new advent of generative AI and how easy it is to, get into a generative AI driven chatbot. Let's do an MVP. It's going to take you 6 weeks, and then we can build on it.
Right.
You can add more use cases to it. You can start with a LLM that's kind of set up for that use case, and how easy it is to add more data sources to it, leveraging Bedrock.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the changes in this sort of this era of computing that we find ourselves is, in the past, it used to be that you may be fortunate to be in a position where you can afford to buy the technology and deploy it into your enterprise.
Right.
And company B couldn't.
Yeah.
It was completely binary. They didn't have the money, but you did have the money. Now, with this sort of advent of cloud computing, it's been democratized. And so now it's no longer about the access to the technology, it's your ability to use it and deploy it, which requires two things. You have to be able to understand it, and then you actually have to have the skills of the people around you to actually deploy it. That's one aspect. And the other one is that the cost of failure, the cost of trials is so much lower than it used to be. In the past, because it was about physical gear, it was much more risky.
Yeah.
Now you can start to experiment in ways you really couldn't before. And so the combination of those companies that really appreciate those aspects are the ones that typically innovate more quickly.
Okay, so I was watching the keynote this morning, and it was Adam's keynote, and showing some amazing, progress. The stuff with Q, and I love the fact that he went around the wheel and said, "Here's how it impacts the developer. Here's how it impacts the business. Here's how it impacts the call center," as some examples. But at the same time, I have this nagging feeling of it's creating a larger gulf, because that art of the possible is now, it's not a couple of clicks ahead of you. It's a few miles. It could be a few miles ahead of you. Now, in Gen AI, it could just be, stringing a few things together to make it happen. But you still have to have the data pulled together. There's still a lot of real hands-on work that has to happen. And so I'm curious. I mean, we work in the partner world, but I'm curious what you're seeing in how much companies are forced to or leaning into partners, whether it's, one partner to rule them all, whether it's pulling a collection of them together to help them, do the things that they can't necessarily do because they're keeping the lights on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, even, working at AWS, we have very few people, if any, that understand, everything that we do. It's just too broad. It's too difficult. And so you can understand sort of conceptually how these building blocks come together, but really getting into the details of how each of them, can be applied. And so if you sort of project that to the outside world, that's the case for everybody. Nobody can really be familiar with every single aspect of this. And so you're going to need to get some help. And that help can come from a few different places. You can train your own people. You can bring people in who've got some experiences, or you can engage partners. And we advocate for all three, because in many cases, the specialist experiences that a partner can bring can be really powerful. It can help you to accelerate in ways that you were describing earlier, Jay. You have experiences, you have tooling, you have a track record of delivery that mean that you can help. You've seen that problem 1,000 times before. You can help that customer get to the sort of the outcome they're looking for in a much more effective way. And we do see sort of both types of engagement. There's broad reach partners that can be very useful to sort of help accelerate migration, for example. But then if you're really trying to work on something very specific in a particular area, perhaps Gen AI in a particular type of use case or a particular industry or a particular piece of the workflow for an organization, then bringing in specialist resources and partners who can help you. And in many cases, also incremental services, web services. So ISV software again. And so the familiarity of partners with that, because that's another level of sort of volume of components. It's not just the components from AWS, but the many AWS partners, ISV partners that companies want to use and deploy.
I think some of the best conversations that I've had with customers are, as you mentioned, right? They have the three choices. It's new. Like for some businesses, AWS is new. It's exciting. They want their staff to get upskilled. They want to bring in new talent. But the good part of the conversations are that, hey, you have a time to market situation going on, and you do want to do that upskilling. But if you look at Rackspace from an elastic engineering standpoint, when they understand what we can do with that, because they don't need to sign up for a long period of time or a fixed term kind of a thing. They get access to a cross section of deep engineering talent right from the get-go, get themselves upskilled, get them set up, and they can choose to dial it down almost like a mobile data plan, right? It's just fascinating to see that. And
I was thinking the example of reserving capacity in
yeah,
AWS. You just reserving capacity of
absolutely.
some
Yeah.
brains. So much happening in this space. I feel like we could talk about this for hours, of course, but I want to be respectful of your schedule here today. So both of you. So thank you for taking the time. Really
Thank you.
do appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.
Amazing show. Thank you for the partnership.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Partnership.
Thank you for your support.
Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Jeff.